Power was once measured in ounces of metal, not acres of land. The earliest empires did not rise on charisma or courage alone. They were built on a monopoly of materials you have likely never considered. Long before oil or silicon defined global politics, the fate of civilizations hinged on the control of a few specific, astonishingly rare metals. This is the story of the first geopolitical superpowers, entities whose dominance was forged not just in battle, but in the deep mines and distant trade routes for copper, tin, and iron. By the end of our journey, you will see the entire ancient world through a new lens, understanding how the scramble for resources we now take for granted dictated the alliances, wars, and collapses of history's greatest early empires. How did a shortage of one brittle metal cause kingdoms to crumble? Why would a king guard the secret of a common rock as if it were a divine treasure? The answers lie in the earth itself. What do you think is the most valuable resource a society can control? The true rarity of these ancient metals was not just about quantity. It was about location. Think of a precious metal like gold. It is found in many places across the globe, even if in small amounts. Its value is cultural, a symbol of wealth and status. But the metals that built empires were and their sources were shockingly few. To understand this, we must enter the Bronze Age, a period defined by a single revolutionary alloy. Bronze is made from two metals, copper and tin. Copper ore was relatively widespread. Ancient societies from Egypt to Anatolia to the Indus Valley could find local sources of the soft, malleable red metal. But copper alone is too soft for serious tools or weapons. It bends, it dulls. To unlock its potential, you need tin. Adding just a small percentage of tin, around 10%, transforms soft copper into hard, castable, deadly bronze. This was the supermaterial of its day, and herein lay the crisis. While copper sources were scattered, high-quality, workable tin deposits were almost unbelievably scarce. Across the entire expanse of the Mediterranean and Near East, there were perhaps only a handful of mines that produced tin in usable quantities. One of the most famous was in a distant, rugged region known as Cornwall in modern-day Britain. Another crucial source lay in the mountains of Central Asia, in what is now Afghanistan. This meant the entire bronze-based civilization, from the pharaohs to the Mesopotamian kings, depended on long, fragile supply chains stretching thousands of miles. Control one of these tiny, isolated points on the map, and you controlled the lifeblood of every army and workshop in the known world. That is the definition of a strategic resource. It is not merely valuable, it is essential and irreplaceable. Later, iron would shatter this dynamic because iron ore is far more common than tin deposits. But the principle was set. Geopolitical power crystallized around who owned the map, who guarded the mountain pass, and who commanded the ships carrying those few, precious ingots of a brittle, gray metal. This dependence on distant tin created a vulnerability, a single point of failure for every Bronze Age kingdom. But the first step to bronze was always copper, and one empire mastered this foundation so completely it became a superpower. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, what we now call Turkey, the earth held a fortune in reddish-green ore. This was not a secret. For centuries, local communities smelted copper here. But around the year 1600 before the Common Era, a new force emerged that saw this resource not just as material, but as a system of control. They were the Hittites. The Hittite Empire is often remembered for its formidable chariots and its clashes with ancient Egypt. Yet their true source of early strength was administrative and industrial. They became master metallurgists and logistical geniuses. The Hittites did not simply mine copper, they industrialized it. They established state-controlled mining complexes with standardized processes for extraction, smelting, and ingot production. These ingots, often shaped like ox hides for easy transport, became a form of primitive currency and a tool of diplomacy. By controlling the source, the Hittites controlled the supply. A neighboring city-state needing copper for its own workshops would not have to mine it. They could obtain it through trade with the Hittites, but that trade came with conditions, alliances, and political deference. This transformed copper from a commodity into an instrument of foreign policy. The Hittite king was not merely a ruler of people and land. He was the chief executive of the most critical supply chain in the region. His scribes kept meticulous records of output and distribution. His merchants were diplomats. His stockpiles were a strategic reserve that could equip an army or starve a rival's economy. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress city, but its true walls were the ring of secured mines and protected trade routes that fed it. This was a new kind of power, built less on outright conquest and more on a monopoly of necessity. They proved that geopolitical influence could be forged in the furnace and measured in the weight of traded metal, establishing a blueprint that would define empire building for millennia to come. Yet this copper monopoly, as powerful as it was, contained a fatal flaw. The Hittites and every other bronze-wielding society were sitting atop only half of the equation. Bronze requires tin, and tin was the ghost in the machine, the elusive component that made the entire system tremble. Across the vast interconnected world of the late Bronze Age, from the palaces of Mycenae to the temples of Egypt, a silent panic simmered. Archaeologists now call it the tin crisis. Picture the most critical microchip factory in the modern world, and then imagine it exists in only 2 or 3 remote, inaccessible locations on the entire planet. That was tin, while small, scattered deposits existed in places like Anatolia and the Erzgebirge Mountains. The 2 legendary sources that fed empires were almost impossibly far away. One was in Cornwall, at the very edge of the known world in Britain. The other, perhaps even more vital, was in the forbidding mountains of Central Asia, in a region we know today as Afghanistan. This meant the gleaming bronze swords of a Hittite royal guard, the elegant statuary of an Egyptian temple, and the sturdy tools of a Mesopotamian farmer all originated from the same few perilous journeys. Caravans had to trek thousands of miles across deserts and through mountain passes, their precious cargo of dull gray ingots worth more than their weight in gold because of what they enabled. These routes became the most valuable and vulnerable arteries of the ancient world. A landslide in a distant pass, a shift in political alliances with a middleman tribe, or the rise of a new warlord along the route could sever the supply for an entire kingdom. This scarcity did not just make tin expensive, it made it a geopolitical weapon. Controlling a tin mine, or even a single crucial stopping point along the caravan trail, granted a power out of all proportion to the size of the territory. It set the stage for desperate alliances, secret monopolies, and wars fought not for glory, but for secure access to the brittle metal that held civilization itself together. The might of empires was now chained to the stability of a supply line stretching to the ends of the earth. The vulnerability of these long tin routes created an opportunity for a new kind of power. While the Hittites mastered the land, another civilization rose to dominate the sea, transforming piracy into policy and trade routes into an empire. This was the world of the Mycenaean Greeks. From their stark, hilltop palaces like Mycenae and Pylos, they gazed not just over fertile plains, but across the shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean. Their geopolitical strategy was not rooted in vast territorial control, but in the mastery of movement. They became the raiders and guardians of the metal routes. Their famous fortified palaces, with their massive cyclopean walls, were not merely royal homes. they were fortified warehouses and redistribution centers. Inside those storerooms, archaeologists have found not just local pottery, but stacks of foreign goods and, crucially, the tangible evidence of metal wealth, bronze ingots, and specialized workshops for turning raw material into weapons and prestige items. The palace was the heart of a system designed to secure, process, and control the flow of imported copper and tin. The king was less a farmer king and more a merchant lord. His power derived from what he could bring in from beyond the horizon. One stunning discovery brings this entire network into sharp, tangible focus: the Uluburun shipwreck, off the coast of southern Turkey. A merchant vessel from the late 14th century before the Common Era lay preserved on the seabed. Its cargo was a precise snapshot of this high-stakes metal trade. The hull contained 10 tons of copper ingots from Cyprus, over a ton of tin ingots whose origin was likely far to the east, along with glass, ivory, and ebony. This was not a random assortment of trade goods. It was a targeted, high-value shipment of raw, strategic materials. The ship itself was a floating artery of the Bronze Age world, and its loss was an economic catastrophe for someone. This single wreck reveals the breathtaking scale and specialization of the network the Mycenaeans sought to influence. When we read of their legendary military exploits in later epic poetry, we often picture heroes seeking glory. But a strong historical argument suggests their raids and expeditions were frequently driven by a more concrete need: to protect, intercept, or commandeer these vital shipments. A campaign against a coastal city might not be for conquest, but to secure a friendly port or eliminate a rival who was taxing the metal ships. Their famous aggression can be reframed as the calculated violence of a maritime power protecting its supply lines. They were not just warriors, they were the naval force that ensured the lifeblood of bronze continued to flow to their fortified palaces, where it could be transformed into the tools of their own enduring power. But what did this high-stakes network actually look like in practice? The Uluburun shipwreck is not just an artifact, it is a frozen moment. For over 3,000 years, it rested on the seabed, a perfect time capsule of Bronze Age geopolitics. When archaeologists carefully recovered its cargo, they found a manifest that reads like a royal inventory. The primary weight was metal, 10 tons of copper ingots stacked neatly in the hold, alongside over 1 ton of tin ingots. This precise ratio, roughly 10:1, is the exact formula needed to produce bronze. This was not a general trader carrying a bit of everything. It was a specialized bulk carrier for the most critical raw material of the age. Alongside this metallic fortune were luxury goods: ebony logs from Africa, ivory tusks, cobalt blue glass ingots from Mesopotamia, and golden jewelry. This combination tells a profound story. The ship was not engaged in simple barter between merchants. This was a state-sponsored diplomatic mission, a delivery of essential strategic resources mixed with royal gifts. It represents the economy of palaces, where wealth was concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite who traded in bulk commodities and sealed alliances with precious objects. The very standardization of the copper ingots, their consistent ox-hide shape, speaks to an international system of weights and measures, a common language of trade understood from Egypt to Anatolia to the Aegean. The loss of this single vessel would have been a financial and political disaster, a ruptured treaty, or an army left unequipped. Its voyage underscores a central truth: the stability of kingdoms depended on the safe passage of a few vulnerable ships across the open sea. This concentrated wealth and centralized control created immense power, but it also built a world that was remarkably fragile, its prosperity balanced on a knife's edge. While the Mycenaeans built fortresses to guard their metal wealth, an earlier and strikingly different civilization flourished on the island of Crete. The Minoans present a historical puzzle. Their great palaces like Knossos were sprawling, colorful, and most tellingly unfortified. there were no massive walls designed to keep armies out. This stands in stark contrast to the heavily fortified citadels of their neighbors. So how did they maintain their clear dominance across the Aegean Sea for centuries? The answer may lie not in military might, but in mercantile genius, specifically their command over the copper trade. Long before the Mycenaeans patrolled the waves, the Minoans established what scholars call a Thalassocracy, a maritime empire built on the control of sea lanes rather than land. Their island of Crete was perfectly positioned at the crossroads of the eastern Mediterranean, a natural hub between the rich copper mines of Cyprus, the metalworking centers of Anatolia, and the emerging markets of the Aegean. It is a compelling theory that Minoan power was not seized by the sword, but purchased with ingots. They likely became the indispensable middlemen, the trusted brokers who ensured Cypriot copper reached the workshops of mainland Greece and Anatolia. Their elegant, unwalled palaces were not military headquarters but economic engines, functioning as centralized warehouses, administrative offices, and perhaps even trading floors where deals were struck and cargoes were inventoried. The vibrant frescoes depicting dolphins and lively processions suggest a culture confident in its security and prosperity, a security derived from economic interdependence rather than sheer force. Their power was fluid, based on relationships and reliable supply. If you controlled the ships and the knowledge of the routes, you could build an empire without ever conquering a city. The Minoan model shows us an alternative path to superpower status, one where the peaceful control of a critical resource flow could create a golden age, proving that geopolitical influence could wear a more graceful, though no less powerful, face. But a peaceful empire of trade cannot last forever in a world hungry for resources. The unfortified palaces of the Minoans were a testament to their commercial power, yet they also presented a target. When we look for the engine that drove the ambitions of their rivals, we need to sail south to a single, sun-baked island in the eastern Mediterranean. Its very name became synonymous with the metal it held, Cyprus, from the Greek word for copper. For over 2,000 years, this island was not a quiet outpost. It was the indispensable bank vault of the Bronze Age world. Its geology gifted it with some of the richest and most accessible copper ore deposits anywhere in the region. To control Cyprus was to hold a chokehold on the primary ingredient for bronze. This made the island a prize fought over by every major power in a slow, centuries-long tug of war. In its early days, Minoan merchants likely established a strong presence there, securing their supply line at the source. Later, as Mycenaean influence grew, their presence is marked by the distinctive pottery and architecture found at Cypriot sites, signaling a takeover of the critical trade node. The Hittite Empire, from its Anatolian heartland, also cast a covetous eye southward, seeing Cyprus as a vital piece in its strategy to dominate the metal trade. Egyptian pharaohs, needing copper for their own monumental projects and military, dispatched trade missions and sought treaties to guarantee their share of the Cypriot output. Each shift in control was less about adding territory to a map and more about seizing the master switch for a continent's economy. The story of Cyprus reveals a fundamental truth of early geopolitics. The most powerful places were often not the grand capitals, but the unassuming locations where the earth gave up its rare treasures. An island's fate was decided by the dull green ore beneath its hills, making it the quiet, indispensable kingmaker of the ancient world. This intricate web of bronze dependency, however, was about to be severed by a new discovery. While empires jostled for control of copper and tin, a quiet revolution was taking place in the highland forges of the Hittites. They had unlocked the secret of iron. The transition from bronze to iron was not a simple upgrade. It was a complete paradigm shift in material science. Early iron, when properly smelted and worked, was fundamentally superior. Bronze is an alloy, a mixture of two soft metals that together create a harder substance. But iron, when carbon is introduced during the smelting process, becomes steel. This gave it a decisive advantage. Iron weapons could hold a sharper, harder edge, and were less likely to bend or shatter in combat compared to their bronze counterparts. An iron sword was not just a tool, it was a technological leap that could cleave through a bronze helmet. Furthermore, while high-quality iron ore was not everywhere, it was exponentially more common than the exceedingly rare tin deposits. The potential to break free from those fragile, thousand-mile supply chains was immense. But here is the crucial twist: the Hittites did not immediately share this revolutionary knowledge. For roughly 2 centuries, from around 1400 to 1200 before the Common Era, they treated advanced iron smelting as a closely guarded state secret. Their blacksmiths were not just artisans, they were sworn custodians of a military advantage. The techniques for achieving the high temperatures needed to smelt iron effectively, and the process of carburization that turned it into usable steel, were protected as fiercely as any fortress. This created history's first documented technological monopoly on a metal. It was not a monopoly of a resource location, like a mine in Cyprus, but a monopoly of knowledge and technique. This secret became a central pillar of Hittite military supremacy, allowing them to field smaller, better-equipped forces whose weapons gave them a critical edge. Their empire, already powerful from its copper administration, now wielded the next generation of martial technology, while their rivals were still reliant on the old bronze system. It was a silent advantage that reinforced their status as a geopolitical superpower, proving that controlling knowledge could be even more potent than controlling the resource itself. The Hittite monopoly on iron was a secret written not in stone but in clay. We know this because of a remarkable archaeological discovery, a trove of diplomatic letters found at the site of Amarna in Egypt. These clay tablets, inscribed in the cuneiform script of the day, form an ancient royal email server, capturing the day-to-day negotiations between the great powers. And within their formal greetings and elaborate courtesies, the true currency of geopolitics is laid bare: shipments of metal. In one famous exchange, the Hittite king writes to an Egyptian pharaoh, not with a threat of war, but with a pointed reminder of a promised delivery of iron. The tone is that of a business partner following up on an overdue account, yet the subtext is immense. The Hittite is flexing his unique position as the sole supplier of this advanced technology. He is not just sending a gift, he is demonstrating a form of leverage, a reminder that Egypt's access to the best weaponry depends on his goodwill. In another letter, a different monarch, possibly the king of Alashiya, which is ancient Cyprus, apologizes for sending a reduced shipment of copper, blaming the delay on enemy action. This is more than an excuse, it is a stark admission of how fragile the entire system was. A single raid on a mining outpost or a pirate attack on a cargo ship could ripple through palaces thousands of miles away, delaying projects and leaving arsenals incomplete. The letters show kings haggling over the quality of gold, negotiating the exchange rate between silver and tin, and offering lavish gifts of crafted metal objects to secure favor. These were not mere tokens of friendship, they were strategic investments. A chest of silver sent from Babylon to Egypt was not just treasure, it was liquid capital that could be used to purchase loyalty, hire mercenaries, or commission more bronze from a third party. The denial of a shipment was a serious diplomatic insult, often a prelude to colder relations or outright conflict. What emerges from these baked clay archives is a world where high statecraft and raw materials were inseparable. A king's power was measured not only by the size of his army, but by the contents of his treasury and the reliability of his supply lines. The most eloquent diplomat in the world was powerless if he could not guarantee the next delivery of ingots. This correspondence proves that long before modern embargoes or sanctions, The first tool of international pressure was the deliberate granting or withholding of the rare metals upon which civilization itself was built. Yet this entire interconnected world, a delicate web of royal letters and metal shipments, suddenly unraveled. Around the year 1200 before the Common Era, the lights went out across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire vanished. The great palaces of Mycenae were burned and abandoned. Trade routes from Egypt to Mesopotamia fell silent. This period, known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, remains one of history's most profound mysteries. How could so many powerful, interconnected civilizations fail almost simultaneously? A compelling modern theory suggests it was not a single invasion or natural disaster, but a catastrophic systems failure with the fragile metal trade at its very heart. Imagine a global supply chain today, reliant on a handful of specialized factories and a few key shipping lanes. If those were severed, modern economies would stagger. The Bronze Age world operated on that same precarious principle. Its superpowers were not self-sufficient. They were nodes in a network, utterly dependent on the constant flow of copper and especially tin. One dominant theory points to the mysterious sea peoples, marauders mentioned in desperate Egyptian inscriptions. They were likely not a single tribe, but a cascade of displaced groups moving by sea and land. Their attacks may have been less about conquest and more about survival, but their impact was devastating. They did not need to conquer the great capitals. They simply needed to raid the coastal ports and intercept the ships that carried the lifeblood of tin and copper. If they severed those maritime arteries for a sustained period, the entire system would begin to suffocate. A king could not equip his army. Artisans could not make tools. The very symbols of royal power and economic control, the bronze ingots and weapons, would cease to be produced. This resource shock would have triggered a domino effect of internal crises. Without bronze to reward soldiers and maintain authority, how could a palace elite hold power? Local populations facing hardship and a withdrawal of central authority might have rebelled or simply walked away from the cities, returning to simpler, localized ways of life. The collapse, then, might be seen not as a sudden violent end, but as a slow strangulation. The intricate system of monopolies and long-distance trade that had built these superpowers contained the seeds of their own vulnerability. When the shock came, the system had no resilience, no backup plan. The empires did not fall to a superior force. They crumbled from within when the resource that defined them could no longer reach their forges. Their greatest strength became their ultimate weakness. Out of the ashes of the collapsed world, a new and terrifying power rose with a singular purpose. The Assyrian Empire did not inherit the old system. It built a new one from the ground up, and its foundation was iron. Where the Hittites had guarded the secret, the Assyrians perfected the process, turning a technological advantage into an engine of conquest. They were the first civilization to industrialize iron production. State-controlled workshops, or kamu, were established across the empire, operating under strict royal supervision. These were not small, artisan forges. They were early factories, standardizing the production of everything from plowshares to spearheads. This mass production gave them an overwhelming logistical advantage. They could equip an entire army with uniform, high-quality iron weapons, something no rival kingdom could match. A farmer conscripted into the Assyrian ranks would not carry a hand-me-down bronze weapon. He would be issued a newly forged iron spear, its point hardened to a deadly sharpness. This logistical miracle, the ability to arm thousands of soldiers identically and reliably, made the Assyrian military machine not just powerful, but relentlessly efficient. Their infamous siege engines, their battering rams and mobile towers were clad in iron plates. Even their tools were iron, allowing them to build roads and fortifications at a staggering pace to secure their gains. Their control was total, from the ore in the ground to the weapon in the soldier's hand. The terrifying reliefs that adorned their palaces, depicting conquest and the enforcement of their rule, were not just propaganda, they were a direct result of this metallurgical monopoly. The Assyrians understood that geopolitical supremacy was no longer about controlling a single, distant mine, but about mastering the entire chain of production. They weaponized the Iron Revolution, creating a model of empire built on standardized industry and systematic force that would echo through the ages. While the Assyrians built their empire on iron discipline, another civilization thrived on a completely different principle. They were the Phoenicians, the master traders of the ancient Mediterranean. Think of them not as a traditional empire with vast armies, but as the ancient world's equivalent of a Silicon Valley tech hub combined with a global shipping conglomerate. Their power was not territorial, it was informational and logistical. While great kings fought over known mines, the Phoenicians sailed beyond the horizon to find new ones. Their greatest discovery lay far to the west beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in a land rich beyond imagination, Iberia, modern-day Spain. Here they found not just silver but mountains of it. The Rio Tinto region became a legendary source of wealth, its rivers running red with iron oxide from the massive mining operations. The Phoenicians did not conquer Spain in the name of a king. They established trading posts like Gadir, modern-day Cadiz, as neutral commercial ports. From these outposts they funneled a torrent of Spanish silver back to the east, where it became the preferred currency of empires like Assyria and Egypt. Silver was more than money, it was the grease for the entire machinery of state, used to pay soldiers, fund temples, and facilitate international trade. By controlling this new, abundant source, the Phoenicians inserted themselves as the indispensable middlemen, but their genius went beyond mere discovery. They perfected the system of distribution. Their iconic bireme ships, powered by both sail and oar, were the most advanced cargo vessels of their day, capable of long, reliable voyages. They established a network of independent city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, which functioned as neutral trading hubs. An Egyptian envoy, a Hittite merchant, and a Greek sea captain could all meet in the markets of Tyre to negotiate for tin, copper, silver, or the brilliant purple dye the Phoenicians themselves produced. These cities were geopolitical Switzerland, fiercely independent and deliberately unaligned, because their entire business model depended on being a trusted marketplace for everyone. This gave them an influence that far outweighed their military size. A king planning a campaign needed to equip his army, and that meant he needed to secure a line of credit, often in silver, with a Phoenician trading house to purchase the necessary metals and materials. The Phoenicians, in essence, became the bankers and the supply chain managers for the superpowers. They wielded power not by commanding armies, but by controlling the access to resources and the information about where to find them. In a world still defined by scarcity, they mastered the art of connection, proving that sometimes the most powerful entity on the map is not the one that holds the sword, but the one that knows where the metal is and exactly how to get it to you. That Phoenician network of neutral ports and secret trade routes points to a deeper truth. The greatest power was often held by those who knew a secret and kept it. No story captures this better than the legend of Tartessos. Far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in the sun-baked lands of southwestern Iberia, ancient writers whispered of a kingdom of unimaginable wealth, a civilization built on rivers of silver. For the Greeks, Tartessos was a mythic realm at the edge of the world, ruled by a wise king named Arganthonios, whose very name meant silver. The historian Herodotus wrote of its incredible riches, describing a king who gifted a visiting Greek explorer with so much silver the visitor's ship could not even carry it all. But was this just a fable? The reality is that Tartessos was almost certainly a real, sophisticated culture, one that grew extraordinarily wealthy from the very silver mines the Phoenicians tapped into at Rio Tinto. The kingdom likely served as the native power controlling the inland sources, while the Phoenicians handled the maritime export. This partnership created a legend, but it also created a deliberate fog of geographic secrecy. For the Phoenician merchants, Tartessos was not a destination to be advertised on a map. It was a proprietary trade secret, a corporate asset to be protected at all costs. They had no interest in publishing sailing directions. In fact, they actively spread misleading stories about treacherous seas and monsters beyond the Strait of Gibraltar to deter competitors, especially the curious Greeks. The knowledge of where to find this silver was arguably more valuable than a single shipload of the metal itself. It represented a perpetual source of income, a monopoly on access. This is why Tartessos remained half-shrouded in myth for centuries, the details of its exact location and true nature blurred by tall tales. The myths of a city with silver walls were not just fantasies, they were a form of informational security, a smokescreen thrown up around a geographic fact to protect a commercial empire. The story shows us that in the scramble for rare metals, cartography became a form of cryptography, and a well-kept secret could be the foundation of a fortune. While the Phoenicians guarded the secret of Western silver, an ancient superpower to the east built its empire on a river of gold. For the pharaohs of Egypt, gold was not merely wealth, it was the physical manifestation of the sun god's power, a divine metal that promised eternal life and absolute authority. But this symbol of the heavens had a very earthly source, the rugged, sun-scorched land to the south known as Nubia. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was not one of simple trade, it was a story of systematic extraction, a colonial enterprise fueled by military might. The pharaohs did not request gold from Nubia, they conquered it to own the mines themselves. From the earliest dynasties, Egyptian expeditions pushed south, establishing fortified towns and military outposts along the Nile. These were not trading posts, they were administrative centers for resource control. The most famous of these mines were in the desolate Wadi al-Aki and the mountains of the eastern desert, places where the heat was punishing and the work was brutal. Egyptian overseers managed operations that employed local labor, digging narrow, treacherous shafts deep into the quartz rock to extract the ore. The gold was then washed, smelted, and cast into standardized rings or ingots for the long journey north, a ceaseless caravan of divine wealth flowing directly into the pharaoh's treasury. This was not an occasional tribute, it was a continuous state-managed pipeline, turning a foreign land into an engine of imperial finance. Egypt's dominance was literally forged in the Nubian desert. This endless stream of gold solved the fundamental problem of every ancient state: how to pay for everything. It financed the staggering megalithic projects that defined Egyptian civilization, the pyramids, the temples of Karnak, the colossal statues. It paid and fed the vast armies that secured Egypt's borders and projected its power abroad. But perhaps most crucially for the broader geopolitical game, gold was the ultimate strategic reserve, the universal currency that could buy anything on the international market. When Egypt needed copper from Cyprus or tin from distant Anatolia to maintain its own bronze industry, it did not barter with grain or linen alone, it paid in gold. A pharaoh's envoy could arrive in a foreign port with a chest of Nubian gold rings and command the best materials, the finest craftsmen, or the allegiance of mercenary forces. Gold gave Egypt liquidity and flexibility that other powers lacked. While the Hittites were bound to their copper mines and the Mycenaeans to their sea lanes, Egypt possessed a portable, timeless asset that could be deployed anywhere. This turned gold into more than an ornament. It was the fuel for diplomacy and war, the means to participate in and influence the entire Eastern Mediterranean metal trade without being beholden to a single, fragile resource chain. The gleam of Nubian gold in an Egyptian treasury was the gleam of pure, unassailable geopolitical option. proving that the control of a precious metal could underwrite an empire's ambitions for millennia. But gold was not the only metal that could build an empire. Centuries later, in a rocky, unassuming corner of Greece, a different kind of discovery would fund the birth of an idea: democracy itself. In the year 483 before the Common Era, prospectors working the sun-baked hills of Laurium just south of Athens struck something extraordinary: a massive, previously untapped vein of silver. This was not a gradual trickle of wealth, it was a sudden, staggering windfall, a fortune in gleaming metal lying in the earth beneath the feet of a struggling city-state. The discovery presented Athenian citizens with a profound and immediate choice. According to tradition, the enormous sum was to be divided equally among every citizen, a direct cash payment that would have transformed personal lives. Yet one visionary leader saw a different future in that silver. The statesman Themistocles stood before the Athenian assembly and made a radical proposal. He argued that this wealth should not be distributed but invested. He convinced his fellow Athenians to pour the entire treasure into a single, monumental public project: the construction of a massive navy of 200 state-of-the-art warships called triremes. This was a staggering gamble, a collective decision to forego immediate personal gain for a shared strategic future. It transformed raw metal into organized power. The sleek, fast triremes, powered by the muscles of citizen rowers, became the cutting-edge military technology of the age. And this silver-funded fleet found its purpose just 3 years later, when the colossal Persian Empire invaded Greece. At the narrow Strait of Salamis, the outnumbered Athenian navy, its ships built with Laurium silver, executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. They lured the larger Persian fleet into confined waters where their triremes' agility proved decisive. The victory at Salamis was not just a military triumph, it was a validation of Themistocles' vision and the collective will of the Athenian people. It saved Greece from conquest and announced Athens as the preeminent naval power in the Aegean. In the decades that followed, that same navy secured the Delian League, an alliance of city-states that slowly transformed into the Athenian Empire. The tribute that flowed into Athens from its allies rebuilt the city in marble, funded the arts, and sustained the democratic institutions that allowed citizens to gather and debate. Every salary for a public servant, every stone of the Parthenon, every play performed at the Dionysian festival could trace its lineage back to the silver veins of Laurium. Here, the monopoly on a specific metal did not just enrich a king or a palace elite, it empowered a citizen body. It proved that a strategic resource, when collectively owned and strategically deployed by a democracy, could fuel not just an empire but an entire cultural golden age. The course of Western history was altered not by a crown but by a vote on how to spend a mountain of silver. The democratic experiment in Athens was a fragile light, and its silver-funded brilliance could not shine forever. To the north, in the rugged kingdom of Macedon, a king with a keen eye for weakness saw a different use for metal, not as a tool for civic debate, but as a weapon to dismantle the very city-states that practiced it. Philip II was a master of realpolitik, a ruler who understood that the true battlefield was not just the grassy plain, but the treasury. His kingdom, once considered a backwater by the cultured Greeks to the south, possessed one overwhelming advantage: the richest gold and silver mines in the entire region, particularly the recently captured mines of Mount Pangaeus in Thrace. Philip did not just own these mines, he weaponized their output. He established a royal mint that began churning out an unprecedented flood of high-quality coinage. The famous gold staters and silver tetradrachms stamped with the image of Zeus and a charging horse. This was not mere wealth, it was a strategic stockpile of influence. Philip grasped a simple, brutal truth: in a world of proud but perpetually squabbling Greek city-states, loyalty was often for sale. His coins became the ultimate political tool. He used them to fund a network of informants and sympathizers within the walls of Athens, Thebes, and other rivals, bribing key politicians to argue against opposing him. When diplomacy failed, his silver paid for the finest mercenaries in the Mediterranean, professional soldiers who fought not for a city, but for a paycheck, allowing him to campaign year-round without recalling a citizen militia for harvest. Most importantly, this river of precious metal financed the creation of a revolutionary new force, a full-time, professional Macedonian army. He could afford to drill his infantry, the future legendary phalanx, constantly, equipping them with the long sarissa pike that would become the terror of Greece. While Athenian silver had built a fleet for collective defense, Philip's gold built a machine for systematic conquest. He turned economic power derived from a monopoly on the mountains of the north directly into military and political dominance, proving that control of the mint could be more decisive than control of the assembly. By the time his son Alexander inherited the throne, he did not just receive a kingdom, he inherited an empire's worth of coin, a war chest that would fund a march to the ends of the known world. Alexander's conquests were funded by his father's mines, but the greatest empire of the ancient world was built on a different principle, not just extraction but administration. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, faced a challenge no one had ever solved: how to govern a territory of such immense diversity and distance. Their answer was not a secret mine, but a system, a vast bureaucratic machine designed to harvest and redistribute the resources of an entire continent. At the heart of this system was the legendary Royal Road. We often think of it as a simple highway for messengers, a primitive postal service, but that view misses its true genius. The Royal Road was the physical backbone of a logistical empire, a 2,500-kilometer-long artery built for one primary purpose: to move tribute from the provinces to the imperial core. And the most critical form of that tribute was precious metal. The Persians perfected a method of resource control that was both elegant and absolute. They conducted detailed surveys of every satrapy or province in their domain. They calculated its wealth, its agricultural output, and crucially, its mineral resources. Then they levied an annual tribute, not in kind with random goods, but in standardized weights of silver and gold. A province like Egypt, rich in grain, would still pay its dues in silver, likely acquired through trade funded by its own agricultural surplus. A mining region like Lydia would pay directly from its silver strikes. This system transformed the chaotic diversity of an empire into a single, flowing economy of metal. At regular intervals, caravans of guarded wagons would begin their journey along the smooth, maintained surface of the Royal Road, their cargo, thousands of identical silver ingots and gold darics, the empire's official coin. These shipments were not occasional gifts, they were the predictable, life-sustaining revenue of the state. The road itself, with its way stations, fortified garrisons, and official inspectors, ensured this wealth moved safely and efficiently, immune to bandits or ambitious local governors who might be tempted to withhold it. Upon reaching the imperial capitals like Persepolis or Susa, this metal was melted down and reissued as coinage, stored in vast underground treasuries, or transformed into the magnificent gold and silver artifacts that adorned the palaces. This centralized hoard served a profound geopolitical purpose. It allowed the Persian king of kings to project power without constant warfare. A rebellious satrap could be quelled not only by armies, which the road also moved swiftly, but by the sheer economic weight of the throne. The king could buy the loyalty of local elites, fund massive public works to employ populations, and hire mercenary forces from one end of the empire to police the other. The Royal Road made the empire's financial power instantly mobile. It turned scattered local resources into a concentrated instrument of control. In this light, the Persian Empire was less a traditional conquest state and more a brilliantly engineered corporation, with the royal road as its supply chain and its annual audit conducted in silver and gold. The monopoly was no longer on a single metal source, but on the very system that collected and deployed all of them. The Persian system of centralized tribute was a marvel of bureaucratic control, yet it could not contain the ambitions of rival powers forever. When the Roman Republic and the maritime empire of Carthage first clashed, their battlefield was the island of Sicily, but the true prize lay beneath the waves. The First Punic War, a grueling 23-year struggle, is often remembered for its dramatic naval battles and heroic legends. But beneath the surface, it was a brutal, calculated fight over the flow of metal. By the middle of the 3rd century before the Common Era, Rome had expanded across the Italian peninsula. Its legions, once a citizen militia, were evolving into a professionalized force, and that transformation required a new kind of fuel, vast quantities of silver to pay its soldiers and fund its campaigns. Carthage, meanwhile, was the inheritor of the Phoenician legacy, a commercial empire whose wealth and formidable mercenary armies were sustained by one primary source, the seemingly endless silver mines of Spain. The narrow strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily was not just a geographic choke point, it was the valve on this pipeline of wealth. Whoever controlled Sicily controlled the sea lanes through which Spanish silver sailed east to Carthage and potentially north to Rome. The initial spark over a local dispute in Messina was merely the flint. The tinder was the strategic geography of the entire central Mediterranean. For Rome, allowing Carthage to solidify its hold on Sicily meant accepting that a rival power could, at any moment, strangle its access to the financial resources needed to grow. For Carthage, a Roman presence on Sicily was an existential threat to its economic lifeline, the route that connected its colonial mines to its capital's treasury. The war was not a simple territorial grab. It was a preemptive strike for resource security by two systems on a collision course. Rome, a land power built on citizen soldiers and organized agriculture, now needed to secure the sea to secure its financial future. Carthage, a sea power built on trade and mercenaries, needed to protect its maritime highways to pay the armies that protected its land. The conflict was inevitable because both empires could not be secure while the other commanded the crossroads of their essential wealth. The Roman victory over Carthage did more than just secure a territory, it seized an engine of wealth. After the Second Punic War, the terms of surrender were devastating for Carthage and transformative for Rome. Among the losses was Carthage's entire sphere of influence in Iberia, including the legendary silver mines. Overnight, Rome inherited the very financial heart that had powered its greatest rival. This was not merely winning a war, it was acquiring the treasury that would fund the next century of conquest. The Roman Republic, once a frugal society of farmers and soldiers, now stood at the mouth of a river of silver. To understand the scale of this windfall, you must picture the mining operations at a place like Rio Tinto. The Romans did not simply dig shafts, they industrialized extraction on a previously unimaginable level. They employed a technique known as hydraulic mining, or ruina montium, the ruin of the mountains. Using aqueducts and complex sluice systems, they would channel vast quantities of water to the top of a silver-bearing hill. They would then suddenly release this pent-up force, a controlled deluge that would wash away entire hillsides, exposing the ore beneath in a single, catastrophic erosion. It was mining as geological warfare, a deliberate reshaping of the landscape to harvest metal with brutal efficiency. The scale was staggering, producing hundreds of tons of pure silver annually. This was not a treasure to be spent once, it was a permanent, state-controlled revenue stream, and Rome knew exactly what to do with it. This silver became the literal currency of empire. It was minted into the denarius, the coin that would become the standard across the Mediterranean. These coins paid the legions that pushed Rome's borders into Gaul, Greece, and Asia Minor. They funded the construction of the iconic roads that stitched the empire together and the aqueducts that fed its growing cities. Perhaps most significantly, this newfound wealth financed the annona, the grain dole for the citizens of Rome itself. By providing subsidized food, the state could placate a growing urban population, ensuring stability and loyalty. The influx of Spanish silver fundamentally altered Roman society, shifting its economic center of gravity from land ownership to state-controlled currency and distribution. It bankrolled the transition from a regional Italian power to a sprawling, integrated superpower. The mines of Spain were not just a resource, they were the fuel pump for an entire imperial system, proving that the most decisive consequence of war could be the quiet takeover of a distant mountain and the relentless flow of metal it produced. The Roman silver that funded its legions flowed south, but another current of commerce moved in the opposite direction, carrying a substance that felt like captured sunlight. From the misty shores of the Baltic Sea, a network of trails and riverways stretched thousands of kilometers to the bright coasts of the Mediterranean. This was the amber route, an invisible highway for a material that was neither a metal nor a tool, but a piece of ancient magic. Amber is fossilized tree resin, often holding perfectly preserved insects or plant matter from millions of years ago. To the sophisticated civilizations of the South, it was a coveted luxury, a golden gem with mystical properties, believed to hold the power of the sun and ward off illness. For the northern tribes who controlled its source, it was something far more practical, a currency of immense power. While the great empires of the Mediterranean battled over copper, tin, and silver, the societies of Northern Europe were engaged in a different kind of strategic exchange. The tribes living along the Baltic coast, ancestors of Germanic and Celtic peoples, held a monopoly on the world's finest amber. They gathered the golden lumps from the sea or mined them from shallow pits, then began the long, perilous journey south. These traders did not travel the entire distance themselves. Instead, amber moved through a relay system, passing from hand to hand through a chain of intermediaries across Central Europe. At major river crossings or mountain passes, local chieftains would control the trade nodes, taking a portion of the amber as a toll or exchanging it for local goods. By the time a small pouch of raw amber reached the shores of the Adriatic or the markets of the Hellenistic world, its value had multiplied 100-fold. This was where the true geopolitical exchange happened. The northern traders were not seeking more amber, they were seeking the technologies of power from the south. In exchange for their golden resin, they received finished goods of immense value in their own world, primarily bronze and later iron. A single, beautifully crafted bronze sword, a decorated helmet, or a set of iron tools represented a staggering concentration of wealth and technological advantage. These were not mere trinkets, they were the instruments of social and military dominance. A chieftain who could secure a steady flow of such metal goods through his control of a segment of the amber route could arm his personal retinue with superior weaponry, distribute prestigious gifts to secure loyal followers, and fundamentally alter the balance of power in his region. The amber routes, therefore, created a feedback loop of rising elites far from the Mediterranean heartlands. Control of a trade corridor meant access to southern metal, which solidified a leader's local power, which in turn allowed him to exert greater control over the trade corridor. Hill forts began to appear along these routes, not just as defensive positions, but as toll stations and secure trading posts. The accumulation of Mediterranean metal in northern European graves tells this story clearly, where high-status burials are often accompanied by ornate bronze vessels, weaponry, and sometimes even amber itself, showing a leader's connection to both the local source and the distant market. This network demonstrates that you did not need to own a mine to wield the power of metal. By controlling the path that connected a unique natural resource to a hungry market, emerging leaders could broker their way to supremacy, using the sunlight trapped in ancient resin to buy the tools that would forge entirely new kingdoms. Yet the amber route was just one strand in a far older, wider web of exchange. Long before silk ever traveled from east to west, a vast, grassy sea of land served as the world's first superhighway for ideas and technology. This was the Eurasian steppe, a continuous belt of open grassland stretching from the borders of China all the way to the plains of Hungary. For millennia, this immense corridor was not a barrier but a bridge, and the goods that moved across it most decisively were not luxuries, but the very foundations of power, metal, and horses. While settled empires built walls and roads, the nomadic cultures of the steppe mastered movement, becoming the indispensable intermediaries in a silent, continent-spanning dialogue of innovation. They were the original networkers connecting the distant metallurgical centers of ancient China with the forging traditions of the Near East and Europe. The transmission of bronze technology and later the revolutionary secrets of iron smelting did not leap across the map in a single bound. It traveled at the pace of a horse, passed along through contact, trade, and sometimes conflict between these mobile communities. A new style of dagger forged in the Caucasus Mountains might find its way into the hands of a steppe chieftain who would carry it eastward, where its design would eventually influence blacksmiths on the frontiers of China. This constant, slow diffusion meant that the steppe was not a cultural backwater, but a dynamic clearinghouse for the most advanced practical knowledge of the age. Their role was absolutely critical. They connected worlds that otherwise knew nothing of each other, ensuring that a breakthrough in one corner of Eurasia could eventually reshape societies thousands of miles away. This exchange created a powerful and dangerous synergy. The two greatest technologies of the ancient steppe were perfectly matched: metal and the domesticated horse. Bronze and later iron provided the essential tools to master the horse itself: strong bits for bridles, durable cheek pieces for harnesses, and sharp, lethal points for arrowheads and spear tips. In return, the horse provided the unprecedented mobility to project that metal-powered force across incredible distances. A nomad on horseback, armed with a composite bow tipped with metal arrowheads, became a weapons system of terrifying efficiency. He could travel farther and strike faster than any infantry-based army from a settled empire. This horse-metal nexus transformed the political landscape of the entire continent. It meant that true power on the steppe was not measured in cities or granaries, but in herds of horses and the skill of the metalworkers who equipped their riders. Control over the sources of tin and copper, or later the knowledge of iron, allowed certain tribes to arm more warriors, create more effective cavalry, and dominate their rivals. The steppe corridor thus became a factory for producing a specific kind of geopolitical threat, a highly mobile, militarily superior force that would eventually press against the gates of every great civilization from Rome to Han China. The flow of metal along these grassy routes did not just facilitate trade, it built the very armies that would challenge the world's empires, proving that sometimes the most powerful forces in history are born not in palaces, but in the forge and the saddle, on the endless, wind-swept stage between East and West. While the steppe forged mobile power, a different kind of empire was rising in the East, one where metal was cast not for the saddle, but for the altar and the throne. In the fertile river valleys of ancient China, the Shang dynasty perfected bronze with a purpose that was uniquely their own. Their mastery was not focused on arming vast infantry legions, but on creating objects of breathtaking beauty and profound spiritual authority. The Shang bronze industry was, without exaggeration, the most sophisticated in the ancient world, and its products served a dual purpose that cemented their rule for over 5 centuries. At the heart of their power were the legendary ritual vessels known as Ding and Zun. These were not simple pots or cups, they were monumental sculptures cast in bronze, often covered in intricate, swirling patterns depicting mythical creatures like the Tauti, a protective mask motif. The process itself was a state secret, using a complex piece mold technique that allowed for astonishing detail unachievable elsewhere. But what was their purpose? These vessels were used in sacred ceremonies to offer food and wine to the ancestors and the high god, Dai. By controlling these rituals, the Shang king positioned himself as the sole intermediary between the human world and the divine. The bronze vessel was the tool of this communication, a physical anchor for spiritual legitimacy. Owning and using these objects proved that the king and his elite had the favor of the heavens, a justification for their authority that was visible, tangible, and utterly exclusive. This was the primary function of Shang bronze, to manufacture and display divine right. Yet this spiritual power rested on a very earthly foundation: control of the mines. The Shang heartland in the Central Plains was strategically positioned near vital sources of copper and, crucially, the all-important tin needed to transform it into bronze. Their capital cities, like Anyang, functioned as immense industrial hubs. Archaeological excavations have revealed vast workshops with rows of furnaces, piles of clay molds, and stockpiles of ore and fuel. This was a centralized, state-monitored operation on a staggering scale. The king did not just commission ritual vessels, he owned the entire production chain, from the miners digging ore out of distant hills to the artisans pouring the molten metal. This monopoly served a second, equally vital purpose: warfare. While ritual vessels legitimized the king's rule, bronze weapons enforced it. The Shang elite were chariot-riding warriors, and their arsenals were filled with exquisitely cast bronze dagger axes, spearheads, and helmets. These weapons were not for a common soldier, they were for the noble class, the king's extended family, and loyal allies who formed the core of his military might. A gift of a fine bronze weapon was a gift of status and a bond of loyalty. By controlling the material needed for both sacred ritual and elite warfare, the Shang kings held a dual monopoly. They commanded the means to speak with the gods and the means to destroy their earthly rivals. This fusion of the spiritual and the martial in a single, controlled substance created a form of power that was deeply resilient, anchoring their dynasty in both the fear and the reverence of the people. The gleam of Shang bronze was the gleam of a kingdom believing it had mastered both heaven and earth. The Shang dynasty's bronze monopoly was a spiritual and martial fortress, but even the most resilient traditions can be shattered by a new technology. In China, that technology was iron, and its adoption did not just change weapons. It reshaped the very earth beneath people's feet, setting the stage for a unification that would last millennia. The transition began during the chaotic Warring States period, a time when 7 major kingdoms were locked in a relentless struggle for supremacy. Iron, which had been known for centuries, began to be produced not as a rare, prized metal for ceremonial objects, but as a common, practical material for the masses. The true revolution was not in the sword, but in the plow. Chinese metallurgists developed a method for casting iron, a technique far ahead of its time, allowing them to produce sturdy, relatively cheap tools in large quantities. The most transformative of these was the moldboard plow. Unlike the simple digging sticks or light wooden plows used before, this iron plow was heavy and strong, with a curved moldboard that could slice deep into the tough, compacted soils of northern China and cleanly turn the earth over. This single invention changed everything. Deeper plowing allowed farmers to bring more marginal land under cultivation. It improved drainage and aeration of the soil, leading to dramatically higher crop yields. A farmer with an iron plow could feed his family and produce a substantial surplus. This agricultural explosion fueled a population boom across the competing states, creating larger pools of labor for grand projects and, crucially, larger pools of men who could be conscripted into armies. The kingdom that could most efficiently produce and distribute these iron tools would gain an overwhelming demographic and economic advantage, and one state mastered this logistical challenge with ruthless precision: the kin. Located in the rugged west, the kin were often viewed as semi-barbaric by their eastern rivals, but they possessed a formidable culture of organization and legalist philosophy that treated the state as a machine. They applied this mindset directly to their iron industry. The kin government established a complete state monopoly over all iron production, from mining the ore to forging the final tools. They built massive, standardized foundries operated by state-appointed supervisors and conscripted laborers. Every step was regulated and recorded. This system ensured a reliable, high-volume output of identical iron plowshares, hoes, and spades that were distributed to farmers across kin lands, maximizing agricultural output and stabilizing the food supply for their growing armies. But the same foundries that made plows could, with a simple change of the mold, produce something else: standardized weapons. The kin military was equipped with vast numbers of uniform iron arrowheads, spear points, and parts for their crossbows, a weapon they perfected. While other states might have skilled blacksmiths creating individual pieces, the kin had a factory system churning out interchangeable parts for war. This logistical supremacy meant a kin commander could replace broken equipment quickly and field larger, more consistently armed forces than any rival. When the kin finally launched its campaigns of conquest, it was not just an army that marched east, but the product of an entire industrialized economy. The other warring states, for all their cultural refinement, could not match this systematized output of both food and weapons. The kin victory and the unification of China in 221 before the Common Era was a triumph of organized resource management. It proved that a monopoly over a common metal, when paired with bureaucratic genius, could forge not just tools but an empire destined to endure. Yet every monopoly, no matter how absolute, carries the seeds of its own dissolution. The history of these ancient superpowers is not a straight line of ascent, but a relentless cycle. A civilization discovers a resource, secures its control, and builds a golden age upon that exclusive foundation. But then, inevitably, the foundation cracks. The very concentration of wealth and power that made them strong becomes a target, and the mechanisms of their control begin to slip. This cycle of monopoly and breakdown is the hidden rhythm of ancient geopolitics, driven by four relentless forces. The first is technological diffusion. The Hittites guarded the secret of iron smelting for generations, but secrets, like smoke, cannot be contained forever. When their empire collapsed around 1200 before the Common Era, their master smiths and metallurgical knowledge did not simply vanish. They scattered. Some may have been captured as prized assets by invading forces. Others, seeking new patrons, would have taken their skills to neighboring kingdoms. The closely held techniques for achieving the high temperatures and the carbon infusion that created true steel slowly seeped out across Anatolia and into the Levant. Within a few generations, what was once a miraculous state secret became common knowledge among blacksmiths from Assyria to Philistia. The monopoly was broken not by a battle, but by the inevitable migration of ideas. The second force is the discovery of new sources. Recall the Phoenician grip on Spanish silver. For centuries, their control of the mines at Rio Tinto and their secrecy about the routes gave them immense leverage. But geography is not infinitely concealable. Eventually, rival powers, particularly the Greeks and later the Romans, learned of these sources. Once the location was known, the monopoly transformed from one of exclusive information into a simple contest of military force, which Rome ultimately won. A new mountain of silver could shatter the economic dominance of an old empire overnight. The third force is direct military conquest, the most straightforward shattering of control. The Assyrian absorption of the Levant, the Roman seizure of Carthaginian Spain, the Egyptian subjugation of Nubian gold fields, each of these was a violent transfer of a resource monopoly from one power to another through sheer force of arms. The fourth and perhaps most chaotic force is piracy and raiding. This was the wild card that could destabilize a system without conquering it. The sea peoples who contributed to the late Bronze Age collapse likely did not aim to administer the copper trade. By raiding ports and sinking ships, they severed the vital arteries of commerce, causing the entire centralized system to fail from 1,000 small cuts. Each of these breakdowns, whether slow or sudden, reset the board. The concentration of a rare metal created a superpower, but that concentration also created a single point of failure, an irresistible prize, and a motivation for others to find a way around it. The monopoly was never a permanent state, only a temporary advantage in an endless scramble. The true test of a civilization was not in building the monopoly, but in what it built with the time that monopoly bought before the next challenger emerged. That ancient rhythm of monopoly and breakdown never truly ended, it simply changed its costume. The copper ingots and silver derricks of antiquity have been replaced by a new class of elemental treasures, materials with names that sound like they belong on a starship's manifest: neodymium, lithium, cobalt. These are the rare earth elements and critical minerals that power our modern world, from the smartphone in your hand to the electric vehicle on the street, and they are subject to the same age-old geopolitical logic first written in bronze and iron. Our global civilization, for all its digital sophistication, is built upon supply chains just as fragile and contested as those that stretched from Cornwall to Mesopotamia. Consider the tiny, powerful magnets in everything from hard drives to wind turbines. They rely on rare earth elements like neodymium. For years, a single nation controlled well over 90% of the global supply, processing the raw ore into usable form. This modern monopoly allowed that nation to influence prices, dictate terms, and even temporarily restrict exports, sending shockwaves through manufacturing sectors worldwide. It was a stark reminder that technological advancement does not erase strategic vulnerability, it merely shifts it to a new element on the periodic table. Or look to the green energy revolution, hailed as our path to a sustainable future. Its foundation is the lithium-ion battery, and the scramble for lithium and cobalt has already redrawn the global map of influence. Vast salt flats in South America and deep mines in Central Africa have become the new Cyprus and Laurium, the indispensable sources fueling the next epoch. Corporations and nations now engage in a quiet, high-stakes competition to secure long-term contracts, buy stakes in mining companies, and build friendly alliances with producer countries, precisely as Phoenician merchants once cultivated relationships with Iberian tribes. The logic is unchanged: control the source, control the future. Even the methods of maintaining power echo the past. Where the Hittites guarded the technical secret of iron smelting, modern entities fiercely protect intellectual property around battery chemistry and semiconductor design. Where ancient kings stockpiled ingots in palace treasuries, today's nations designate strategic reserves of critical minerals, storing physical stockpiles as a buffer against market disruption or political coercion. The caravan routes have been replaced by undersea cables and shipping lanes, but their security is just as vital. A single choke point like a narrow strait or a major port can still threaten the flow of essential materials. This is not to say history merely repeats, but it does rhyme with a powerful and consistent meter. The core insight from those earliest superpowers remains profoundly true. Geopolitical power is inextricably linked to the control of specific, non-negotiable resources. Whether the resource is tin for bronze or cobalt for a battery, the competition to secure it shapes alliances, sparks innovation, and defines the rise and fall of influence. Our world may run on silicon and electrons, but its pulse is still measured in the quiet, relentless quest for what lies buried in the earth, a quest as old as civilization itself. The story of ancient power is, in its essence, a story of geology. From the Hittite forges to the kin foundries, the monopoly on rare metals was never a secondary feature of empire. It was the primary engine. Control over a single point on the map, a lonely tin mine or a sun-baked copper vein, dictated the entire structure of the ancient world. It determined who could field an army and with what weapons, shaping military capability at its most fundamental level. It built economic systems, from the tribute flowing down Persia's royal road to the state salaries funded by Spanish silver in Rome. It defined diplomacy, turning royal correspondence into negotiations over ingot shipments and access to trade routes. It even forged political institutions, as the collective decision by Athenian citizens to invest their silver windfall in a navy helped birth the practice of democracy itself. In every case, the scramble for a specific element concentrated wealth, organized labor, and justified authority, creating the superpower template that would be followed for millennia. The pattern is unmistakable, and it reveals a profound constant in human history. Our grandest civilizations and our most transformative ideas are built upon the physical world, upon the quiet, elemental treasures we pull from the ground. The struggle to control the materials of technology, to secure the next critical resource, is not a relic of a simpler time. It is the enduring rhythm of geopolitics. So the next time you hear about a contest over rare earth minerals or a new battery technology, consider it through this ancient lens. You are witnessing the latest chapter in the oldest story, the ongoing quest to command the elements that power our world.